So the trade deadline is getting closer and closer. Actually, from the time shooting this video, it's so close that it's only 2 days away. And while the other team is doing their trading, while players like Duchesne Stone is trying to find a home, didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it did, so I'm going with it. And even some have already found a home. Again, Duchesne actually already found a home, pretty weirdly enough, half an hour ago from shooting this, so that's happened. And then we have still the unanswered question of Stone. We have unanswered question about a few players, Panarin, Bobrovsky. A lot of teams are doing a lot of things, and there's chaos around the market. Who will overpay for somebody? How many draft picks is gonna go one way or another? Is somebody gonna trade their first round pick and then have it horribly backfire into the face? Is Hansel still on the market, so Philadelphia needs to hide Fletcher away in a closet until he trades the first round pick anyways? Or is Tatar going back to Vegas for all of the picks? Probably neither of those last two will happen, but a lot of things will happen throughout the next 48 hours. And I don't think the Minnesota Wild would have a quiet day either. This is not going to be a quiet day, because I think for the first time in around 7 years, we might be sellers. So who are we selling, and who are we selling to? In my opinion, we have 3 names that should be on at least our minds to sell. The first one, in my opinion, is the most easy one to decipher. Eric Staal is on his last year of his contract, one of the few players that's on his last year of the contract. It's a serviceable contract, so while we might not make the playoff due to injuries and other stuff getting in our way, and probably our age trying to kind of hinder us, and potentially needing to actually retool and get younger players, like we saw in the Cole for Donato trade, where we sell off somebody who would help us right now for somebody who might help us long term. So we look like sellers on paper, and when you're sellers, you sell guys with a good contract. That's Eric Staal, who can help playoff teams. Now, who is a playoff team? I think a team like the Winnipeg Jets would love to have Eric Staal. It makes good sense for the Winnipeg Jets to get a center like Paul Stastny was last year, who can go in between Laine, Ehlers, maybe Connor, Laine, something like that. Somebody who can bump down a little to the third line, where he then kind of can play a little bit more of his style, while you have that scoring touch on Staal and that passing vision that Staal actually contains. The one thing speaking against that trade, I think, is the fact that it's in the same division. That's the one thing that can go against that trade. But he has 1 year left. Staal loves it in Minnesota, but with 1 year left, like half a season left, we aren't going to be a major player in the playoff. I don't think so, even if we make it. I think it's a good idea to trade off core pieces now and say, okay, we don't have you for much longer. We need something out of it. And if you like playing here, well, you can go into free agency, and then we sign you from there. It's a little bit of like the Matt Sundin situation with Toronto from like a long time ago, where he didn't want to go to Vancouver. Well, he probably should have, to help them in the future, and then he could have gone back the next season. No, he ended up annoying management so much that he actually eventually got traded to Vancouver and then stayed there. They didn't want to resign him. There wasn't that deal flickering, and it ended up hurting the far more than it was good for. I think this isn't going to hurt the Wild as much if we keep Staal. No, not going to say that. But I think this is a good time to trade him for a team like Winnipeg. There's definitely suitors outside the division if you want to go. Vegas, they would be interested in him, I'm pretty sure. That would mean they could move down Bellemare to the 4th line, especially because that's more like where he should play. Maybe Cody Eakin could play that role instead. There's definitely like a few options, and they would have like that 3rd line, 2nd line, and 1st line center. They would have a big center that's going into a pretty good playoff push. Now, what do we want from those teams when we trade him, Eric Staal, as a rental? Well, I'm looking at the Tatar deal and saying that, but that's probably a bit ambitious. So I would say at least 1/3. So what do we want for Eric Staal? Well, I'm looking at him and seeing the production that he has and the capabilities that he has, and thinking about the Tatar deal from last year and saying, that's about right. Yeah, let's go do that and give us 3 picks, like a 1st, a 2nd, and a 3rd. Yeah, that's not gonna probably happen, but I'm thinking at least a 1st is a good start. Then you look at saying maybe a 2nd and then call it there. That would make sense in my eyes to make that trade. Or you say a 1st and then some of your young prospect. It doesn't have to be a greater prospect. It could be a Roslovic from the Jets, for instance. It could be Nico from the Jets. There's definitely a few players that you could definitely see them go to and say, okay, if we can't get all of that, give us a 1st and then one of your prospects that may turn out to be a top 6 guy. A bit like Donato was, to be honest, but this is just a better player and a better contract for a playoff team, in my opinion. The other players on the block is probably a bit out there, in my opinion. I have Spurgeon, because I know how valuable defensemen are. And Spurgeon, while he's still having 2 years left of his contract, he's such a good player. And I don't know if he's going to be a part of the plans long term for us, because this is starting to go into his twilight years. He's starting to near 30, and I don't know if we have the time to kind of build a team where he fits in that well. We're focused right now on getting Kaprizov. That's our focus right now, getting Kaprizov and build a team around him. That means we probably have like 3-4 years. At that point, he will be 32. It's starting to be a little bit old for a defender like Spurgeon, who is a smaller defenseman, but also a little bit of a crash and burn style kind of defenseman. He is not scared of anything. He plays a lot bigger than he actually is, and that eventually tears up the body a little bit. The teams I have written down on my trusty cell phone is Toronto, Arizona, and Montreal. Toronto is no secret. They want defensemen. That is not a secret at all. Arizona, they have a good defensive core. Spurgeon would be a good piece for them to kind of start getting over the hump that is kind of mediocrity and actually try and make the playoff consistently with that young team. He would be a fine leader on the defense. Put him together with a Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and that's a really good, scary defensive core. And Montreal, because Montreal is starting to look really, really nice as well. They have a good team, a good goalie, but I think the main problems are in the defensive side. He would help instantly on that, and they have a lot of cap space as well. Do I think this will happen? Probably not, but do I think that's probably what we should look into? Yeah, I do. Because we could get probably again a first round pick for that. Something in that vicinity. A first round pick or a really good prospect. What I'm looking at is potentially Nick Suzuki from the Montreal Canadiens. That would be an interesting one. Maybe a Grundstrom or something like that from the Leaf. Maybe, if I'm really, really sneaky, Timothy Liljegren. I don't think that will happen. That's ultimate scenario. If we can get like something like that for Spurgeon, I will bite your hand off, run with the money all the way to the bank, and then lock the door and, for good measure, tear up the receipt into 1,000 bits. You could probably find other players that would be more fair in that trade. Maybe Sandin from the Toronto Maple Leaf would make some sense in terms of the deal for Spurgeon. I think that's a good idea. It's an interesting idea. It's a hard idea to pitch, but that could be a sales pitch for me, at least, saying send for Spurgeon 1-for-1. The one thing that kind of forces that deal off, I think, is probably the fact that they have the trouble of cap space next year with Auston Matthews just signing a massive contract and also needing to sign Mitch Marner and Jake Gardiner. Like, they would have to say, we want Spurgeon for Gardiner, which is a weird little combination. I think they would want for us to retain some salary, which I would be okay with, as long as we exactly get that, a Sandin type of prospect. And it's kind of the same with the other with Staal as well. Like, if we need to retain some salary for like the small bit in order for the cap situation to work, I would do it. Now, the last player I'm expecting halfway to get ridiculed of, halfway not. Don't take this the wrong way, but Jason Zucker is my last player I would look to trade. Jason Zucker has so much beef, so much grit. He is such an interesting player, but he just haven't produced this season. He's having an off year, but I don't know what to say other than I don't think he's going to be much better than he is worth at the moment. I think the contract is worth what he performs, but he isn't a guy I feel is going to be more than a top 6 player. And that's good, but we need the cap room, especially because we have those albatross contracts like Parise, like Suter. I'm not hampering on them as a player. I think Parise has been great this season. I think Suter has been okay this season. I like the contracts in that regard. However, when you look at the players we need to resign, like Greenway, like we need to sign a player like Connon, we need to sign Arberg, we have players that we really need to resign. It's like, we need to kind of find a way to make sure we can dump that cash. And Hoyle was a good starting point, but maybe it's also a good thing now to say bye to Zucker. The teams I want to trade him to is going to be the New York Islanders and again the Montreal Canadiens. They would make sense in my opinion. $5 million is something they can pay, and B, I think they fit well for a guy like Zucker. If you imagine the New York Islanders, they have Barzal centering one line with Eberle, and then they kind of trail off a little bit then from the wingers perspective. They have Eberle, who is great, but it's kind of there is players that is performing admirably, but when you have Andrew Ladd as just like first line right winger, I think Zucker could easily take over that and without batting an eye. And if you trade Zucker, let me tell you, I don't want to trade Zucker for nothing. If you trade Zucker, you damn well get a good player. I don't care. That is where you go, okay, if you want Sugar, you give us the tire money. You give us the kind of Duchesne money. You make sure that we get something great in return. Because if you don't, we can keep Sugar. He's fine. If we can't get the offer we want, no trading. No trading at all. But we should probably look into what they would offer us. Because if they would give us a first round pick and maybe Dobson, yeah, that I could see that be a thing. The Montreal Canadiens, Nick Suzuki would have to be on that. And like, you have to think about that. Would you say no? I don't think I would. I think I would say, okay, that's a trade where I think we win long term while you guys win short term and go for the cup. That's what the trade deadline is about. It's about the buyers who go for the cup now, which we were, and we went completely wrong with Hansel. But if we can do that, other teams can't make the same mistake with us. And Suka would be such a good trade bait for somebody to overextend for. And if they overextend and we make sure that we pick well, that could be a huge turnaround for the Wild. Again, none of these players should go for nothing. I'm not saying just throw them to the wolves. Not what I'm saying. However, I want to see if we can get anything for them. Stoll, I think, is the most obvious, and he's probably the most likely to get traded anyways, but he's definitely the one where, like, okay, that makes the most sense, and that's probably the one everyone thinks is gonna happen. Sugar and Spurgeon is a little bit more out there, I know, but that's what I would do if I was in fantasy. I would look to see what players would come into return. If they don't get the players I want, well, forget about it, I'm hanging up the phone right there. But if you could get something great in return, maybe you should look for it. This was just my thoughts on it. Do you have anybody else you want to see the Minnesota Wild trade before the deadline? Do let me know. And thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.